Today's story is so haunting, it lingers long after the final word, set deep in the American West, where dry wind whispers through sagebrush and the mountains watch like silent witnesses. It's a place where ancient law and human desperation collide, and where one choice can echo across an entire land. It all began with something small, a single touch, a quiet word spoken where it should never have been said. But sometimes the smallest moment is enough to wake something the earth itself refuses to forget. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The sun had not yet cleared the ridge when she knelt again at the edge of the thin spring, fingers brushing the same patch of sage she had touched the morning before. The air was still cool, carrying the faint iron scent of wet stone and the dry sweetness of pinon resin. She moved slowly, deliberately, as though the ground itself might notice any haste. The children needed the leaves for fever. She had promised them that much. Then the wind died. No sudden gust, no warning. It simply stopped. The pinon needles ceased their soft rattle. The small birds that had been scratching in the dust lifted their heads once and went quiet. Even the distant call of a raven, always present at dawn, fell away. The world held its breath. She did not rise. Her hand paused above the sage, knuckles pale against the dark green. She knew this silence. It was not the hush after a storm or the stillness before rain. This was the silence of something remembered. Her eyes lifted, slow, to the place where her own footprint from yesterday still showed faintly in the damp earth near the spring's lip. The mark was small, barely more than a shadow, but it lay where no foot should have rested. Not hers, not anyone's. Years ago, she had stepped there once, in the dark, reaching for a stone that should never have been moved. She had spoken a name aloud, the name of one who used to be called without the proper veil of words. The ground had accepted the trespass then. Now, it refused to forget. A single feather, owl, gray and barred, had drifted down sometime in the night and lodged against the sage stem nearest her hand. It had not been there yesterday. She stared at it. The feather quivered once, though no breeze stirred, then lay still. She exhaled through her nose, the sound barely audible. The children would ask soon why the tea tasted thinner, why the fever lingered. She could walk farther up the draw, find another patch, pretend the spring had simply shrunk with the dry season. Or she could speak the truth to the old woman who waited at the fire with the others. Admit the old violation. Let the words fall like stones into still water, and watch the ripples reach every child, every horse, every scrap of shade left to them. Her fingers closed around the sage anyway. She pulled 3 leaves, careful not to tear the root, and tucked them into the small pouch at her belt. The motion was familiar, practiced. But when she straightened, the weight in her chest had shifted. Not fear. Not yet. Recognition. She turned toward the sacred mountain. Its dark bulk rose against the pale sky, unchanged, unyielding. Somewhere on its flank, the Gan had once danced for rain, their masks white as bone, their steps shaking dust from the pines. She had seen it as a girl. She had believed the mountain would always answer. Now it watched her back. Far down the slope, half hidden by a juniper, a small figure stood motionless. The girl, too young to have a name spoken in ceremony, old enough to remember, did not wave, did not call. She simply looked, dark eyes steady, taking in the woman who had knelt too long at the forbidden spring. The silence stretched another heartbeat. Then the first thin thread of wind returned, brushing the feather against the sage once more. It lifted, turned once in the air, and drifted toward the mountain. She did not follow it with her eyes. She only tightened the pouch strings and started down the path toward the camp. the taste of dust already settling on her tongue. The fire was no more than a handful of pinyon twigs, fed just enough to keep the chill from settling into the bones. She sat cross-legged on the far side of the camp, back to the others, the small flames throwing light only as far as her knees. The rest of the world stayed dark. Hooves shifted in the brush nearby, a soft snort, then silence again. The children had already rolled into their blankets. Their breathing came even and shallow from the low shelters of brush and canvas. She turned her left hand palm up in the firelight. The mark was still there. 3 thin lines across the base of the thumb, faded now to the color of old ash. Not a scar from thorn or knife. Something else. Years ago, in the hour before first light, she had reached into the cleft of rock where the old ones kept the naming stones. She had touched one, spoken the forbidden syllables without the shield of who used to be called. The stone had felt warm, alive, then cold. She had walked away. The mark had appeared the next morning and never left. Tonight the lines looked darker, as though the fire itself were drawing them out. She closed the hand slowly, fingers curling tight. The small leather cord around her wrist, the one braided from her mother's hair, felt heavier than it should. She did not look toward the sacred mountain. She did not have to. Its presence pressed against her back like a hand she could not shake off. The spring that fed the camp lay 50 paces down slope. Yesterday it had run clear, thin, but steady. Now the trickle sounded wrong, interrupted, hesitant, like breath held too long. No birds crossed overhead. Even the bats that usually skimmed the water at dusk stayed away. She listened to the change and felt the old fear coil low in her stomach. Not loud, not sharp, just there. She rose without sound, stepped away from the fire, and crouched beside the spring. The surface reflected nothing. No stars, no moon, only black. She dipped 2 fingers, brought them to her lips. The water tasted of iron and dust, colder than it should be. She wiped her hand on her skirt and stood again. The camp behind her was quiet. Too quiet. The old woman who tended the central fire had not moved from her place, but her head was turned this way, watching. She could walk back, sit down, let the night pass, say nothing. The children would wake tomorrow, thirsty but alive. The old woman might guess, might not speak. The mark on her hand might fade again if she waited long enough. Or she could cross the camp, kneel beside the old woman, open her palm, and let the words fall. Admit the old trespass, name the violation without naming the name. The old woman would listen. Then the others would know. The children would be told to keep distance. The horses might be moved. The camp itself might shift farther down the valley, away from the tainted ground, away from her. She stood motionless a long time. The fire popped once, sending a spark upward that died before it reached the dark. She chose silence. She returned to her place, sat, pulled the blanket across her shoulders. The cord at her wrist pressed into skin. She loosened it, slid it off, laid it on the flat stone beside her knee. The small braided knot caught the firelight for a moment, then dimmed. She did not sleep. She watched the flames shrink to coals. Her eyes stayed open, fixed on nothing. Across the camp, the girl stirred in her blanket. The child rose without waking anyone, small bare feet silent on the dirt. She walked toward the spring, not looking at the woman, not hurrying. When she reached the water's edge, she bent and picked up the leather cord the woman had left behind on the stone. The girl turned it in her fingers, curious, then slipped it over her own wrist. The ground gave a single, low shudder, barely felt, like distant thunder under the earth. For the first time that night, the fear in her chest sharpened into something colder, something final. The sun hung low, a dull copper disk above the ridge, when the women gathered at the edge of the shrinking pool. The water had pulled back another handspan since morning, leaving cracked mud rimmed with white salt. No one spoke of it outright. They simply worked, bending to pull the last of the narrow-leaf yarrow, tying bundles with strips of yucca fiber, laying them on flat stones to dry. The children stayed farther back this time, squatting in the shade of a single juniper, watching with the stillness of small animals that sense a shift in the wind. She came last, carrying only her own small knife and a folded blanket. She did not join the circle. She knelt at the outer rim, 10 paces from the others, and began sorting the yarrow she had gathered earlier, separating leaf from stem with slow, careful cuts. The blade made a soft, dry rasp against the fiber. Each stroke measured, deliberate. She kept her eyes on the work, not on the women. Not on the old man who sat apart under the juniper, his blanket pulled tight across thin shoulders, his gaze fixed on nothing and everything. The old man spoke once, voice low, almost lost in the dry rustle of leaves. "The one who used to walk here," he said, not looking at anyone. "Left a shadow on the water. Shadows do not fade when the sun moves." No one answered. The women's hands did not pause. But the rhythm changed, slower, tighter. A young mother glanced once toward the speaker, then away. Her daughter, the small girl who had taken the cord the night before, sat closest to the water's new edge. The leather braid still circled the child's wrist, darker now from sweat and dust. She felt the glance like heat on skin. She did not lift her head. Her fingers trembled once, barely, and she steadied them against the stone. The yarrow smelled sharp, medicinal, familiar. It had always calmed fever. Now the scent seemed thinner, as though the plant itself knew something had changed. The pool reflected the sky in broken pieces, no longer whole. She watched a ripple spread from nothing, die against the cracked bank. The old man shifted. His blanket whispered against dry grass. "Names carry weight," he said, quieter still, "even when they are not spoken." The words hung. No one moved to contradict. No one moved at all. She could rise now, cross the short distance, kneel before him, open her palm to show the faded lines, speak the violation without naming it. Let the words fall. Let the women hear. Let the children be told to step back, to keep distance from the one who had touched what should not be touched. The camp would shift again, farther from the mountain, farther from the spring that no longer answered cleanly. The children would learn sooner what it meant to carry shame in silence. Or she could stay where she was, keep cutting yarrow, keep the blanket between her and the circle. Let the silence do its work. Let the old man's words settle like dust. Let the pool shrink another inch by nightfall. She chose the second. She tied the last bundle, set it beside the others without touching them. Then she stood, slow. Joints stiff from kneeling too long on hard ground, she folded the blanket across her arm and walked back toward the shelters. No one called after her. No one needed to. Behind her, the small girl rose from the shade. She walked to the pile of yarrow, bent, and picked up the bundle the woman had left. The child turned it in her hands, then said, soft, clear, the way children repeat what they have heard without understanding. "The one who used to be called." The name slipped out, small and unshielded. The women froze, hands stilled above the stones. The old man's head lifted, slow, as though pulled by a string. Every eye turned, not to the child, but past her, to the woman who had already reached the first shelter and stopped, back straight, blanket clutched tight against her chest. The silence that followed was not empty. It was thick, heavy, final. Like the moment before a stone drops into deep water and the ripples have nowhere left to go. The afternoon light slanted long and thin under the sacred mountain, turning the dust gold where it lay thickest. The pool had shrunk again overnight. Its edge was now a pale ring of cracked mud, the water itself reduced to a shallow mirror, no bigger than a blanket spread for drying meat. The women had come anyway. They worked in the thin shade of the junipers, grinding the last yarrow into paste with smooth stones, mixing it with water from gourds carried down from higher up. No one spoke of the change in the pool. Hands moved, steady, practiced. The smell of crushed leaves hung sharp in the still air, undercut by the dry mineral scent rising from the mud. She stayed at the outer edge of the gathering, 20 paces back, where the grass had already begun to yellow and curl. She did not kneel. She stood with arms folded, blanket draped over one shoulder, watching the work without joining it. Her fingers, hidden in the folds of wool, closed around the small braided cord she had taken back from the child at first light. Slipped it off the small wrist while the girl slept. No words exchanged. The leather felt warm from the child's skin. She held it tight, knuckles pale, as though the pressure might keep the old warmth from fading. The old man sat farther out, on a flat stone facing the mountain. His blanket was pulled high, hood shadowing his face. He had not moved since the women arrived. Now he lifted one hand, slow, palm open to the sky, then let it fall again. A gesture older than words. "The one who used to walk the old paths," he said, voice carrying just far enough. "Left prints that do not wash away. The water remembers?" The women's hands slowed, but did not stop. A young mother, the one whose daughter had worn the cord, paused longest. She glanced once toward the speaker, then toward the woman standing apart. Her eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in the quiet calculation of someone weighing what must be protected. She reached for her daughter, drew the child close against her hip. The girl looked up, confused, then over her shoulder at the woman in the blanket. The child's gaze held longer this time. Not fear exactly, but something new, a question that had no shape yet. The woman felt it like a hand on her throat. She did not meet the eyes. She shifted her weight, boot scuffing dry earth, the sound small but sharp in the hush. The grass underfoot crackled, brittle. Yesterday it had bent. Today it broke. She could step forward now, cross the short distance, kneel before the old man, open her hand, show the faded lines on her palm, let the cord fall to the ground between them. Speak the violation, without the forbidden name, but clear enough. The words would settle like dust on water. The women would hear. The children would be told to keep apart. The camp would move again, higher or lower, away from the pool that no longer gave cleanly. The girl would learn distance before she learned trust. Or she could stay rooted where she was. Keep the blanket between her and the circle. Let the old man's words drift past like smoke. Let the pool shrink another finger width by dusk. Let the child's glance turn to something harder over time. She stayed. The young mother turned her back fully now, shielding the girl with her body as she resumed grinding. The paste in the stone bowl darkened, thickened. The old man said nothing more. He only sat, eyes on the mountain, as though waiting for it to speak first. The woman exhaled once, slow, through her nose. The cord in her fist had left red marks on her palm. She loosened her grip, but did not let go. Behind her, the girl twisted in her mother's hold. Small voice, barely above a whisper, carrying on the dry air. "The one who used to be." The name slipped free again, unguarded, small as a dropped bead. The grinding stopped. Stones clacked once against each other, then silence. The women's heads turned, slow as one. The old man's shoulders straightened under the blanket. Every eye settled on the woman standing apart. Not in accusation, not yet, but in the heavy certainty of something already decided. She did not move. She only stood there, blanket clutched tight, the cord hidden in her fist, while the mountain watched and the pool reflected nothing at all. The move began before first light. No drums, no songs, only the low creak of poles being lashed, the soft thud of packs hitting the ground, the occasional snort of a horse catching the scent of dust already rising. The old pool had gone dry in the night. Mud hardened to cracked plates, the last thin sheen of water sucked away by the earth itself. No one said the words. They simply folded the shelters, loaded the travois, and started down the long draw toward the new ground nearer the sacred mountain's base, a place they had used before, years back, when the rain still answered. She walked last, no travois behind her, no child riding her shoulders. Only the blanket rolled tight under one arm, the small knife at her belt, the leather cord now knotted again around her wrist. The others moved in loose order, women leading children, men driving the horses, the old man riding slow at the middle. She kept 50 paces back, boots scuffing the same dust they all raised, but never quite catching up. The wind came low and steady, carrying the smell of dry pine and the faint iron of parched soil. The new ground appeared at midday, a shallow basin ringed by pinyon and scrub oak, the grass already thin and yellowed. No spring bubbled here, only a dry wash that might hold water after rain, if rain came. The horses nosed the ground, then lifted their heads, ears flicking. No graze worth the effort. The children ran ahead anyway, small feet kicking dust, voices thin in the wide air. They stopped short when they saw the grass break under their weight, brittle as old bones. She set her blanket down at the edge of the basin, apart from the others. She crouched, ran a palm over the dirt. It felt wrong. Too loose in places, too hard in others, as though the earth had forgotten how to hold together. She listened to the wind move through the oaks. No birds answered. No deer sign, no rabbit tracks. The animals knew. The land was refusing again. The old man dismounted near the center. He stood a long time without speaking, blanket draped over his shoulders, eyes on the mountain rising dark against the sky. Then he murmured, low enough that only the nearest heard, "The ground is angry. Something has been touched that should have stayed covered." No one replied. But the whispers started later, soft as breath on dry leaves. The young mother whose daughter had spoken the name kept her children close. When the woman approached to help stake a shelter pole, the mother stepped aside without a word, pulling the girl with her. The child looked back once, eyes wide, curious still, but the space between them had grown. Not anger, necessity. She worked alone after that. She walked the farthest line, out to where the basin fell away into rocky draw, searching for any seep or pocket that might hold water. She returned at dusk with empty hands. The others had already kindled small fires, shared what little meat remained. No one offered her a place at the coals. No one refused either. They simply ate in silence, eyes on their own bowls. Night came cold and clear, stars sharp above the mountain. She sat apart, back to a lone oak, blanket pulled tight. She checked the signs again, wind direction, the way the dust settled, the faint tremor underfoot that came and went like a heartbeat too slow. Preparation, not action. Not yet. Footsteps, small, careful, approached from the dark. The girl stopped a few paces away, blanket dragging in the dirt. She did not sit. She only stood, small shadow against the stars. Why doesn't the ground give us water anymore? The voice was soft, no accusation, only the plain question of a child who has seen too much change in too few days. The woman, did not answer at once. She looked past the girl, toward the sacred mountain. Its bulk rose black and silent, the place where the Gan had once stepped in white masks and shaken rain from the pines. She remembered the sound of their feet, the way the ground had answered then. Now it waited. She exhaled once, slow. The cord at her wrist felt tighter in the cold. The girl waited, then turned and walked back toward the fires, small blanket trailing. The woman stayed where she was. She did not move. She only watched the mountain a long time, while the night deepened and the first faint tremor came again. Deeper this time, closer, like the earth itself drawing breath before it spoke. The moon was thin. A pale sickle hung low over the sacred mountain when she left the camp. No one stirred. The fires had burned to gray ash. The horses stood head down in the dark, breath fogging white. She moved without sound, boots wrapped in soft hide to muffle the step, blanket left behind, only the small knife at her belt and the braided cord around her wrist. The night air smelled of cold stone and pine sap, sharp enough to sting the lungs. She followed the narrow cleft that climbed toward the mountain's flank. A path no one used anymore, choked with fallen rock and the skeletons of old juniper. The ground sloped steeper here, forcing her to use hands as well as feet. Each grip left dust on her palms, pale in the moonlight. She did not hurry. She could not afford to slip. The cleft opened onto a small shelf of stone, hidden from below. At its center lay the forbidden spring, once a thin thread of clear water rising from a crack no wider than a man's hand. Years ago she had knelt here in darkness, reached for the naming stone half buried in the bank. Her fingers had brushed it. A name had escaped her lips without the veil. The stone had warmed under her touch, then gone cold. The spring had run clean after that, for a season. Then it had begun to fail. Tonight the crack was dry, the stone still half exposed, smooth and black as obsidian. A single gray feather, owl again, rested on its surface, unmoving. She crouched at the edge, breath shallow. The wind moved through the cleft, carrying faint whispers that might have been her own memory or something older. She reached out. Fingers hovered above the stone. The ground gave a low tremor, subtle, like distant hoofbeats under earth. She hesitated. The tremor came again, stronger. Somewhere far below, in the basin, a horse snorted once, sharp with unease. She could turn back, leave the stone untouched. Let the camp thirst another day, another week. Let the children learn hunger before they learned the full weight of what she had done. The law would hold. The mountain would remember. But the people might survive long enough to move again. Or she could finish what she had begun years ago. Touch the stone once more. Speak no name, but let her hand close on it. Break the last barrier between what was and what must not be. The spring might answer. The basin might fill. The children might drink. But the law would shatter. No ceremony could mend it. No words could veil it again. She would carry the fracture forever. Her hand closed. The stone felt warm, as it had before. She pressed down, palm flat, weight of her body behind it. The ground shuddered, once, hard. A crack split the silence, not loud, but deep. From the cleft below the stone, water rose. Slow at first, dark, then clearer, threading up through the crack like blood from a wound. It pooled, spread, ran over the shelf in a thin sheet. She did not move. She kept her hand there until the warmth faded, until the stone felt ordinary again. The water flowed steady now, stronger than it had in years. A small sound behind her, bare feet on rock. The girl stood at the mouth of the cleft, blanket dragging, eyes wide in the moonlight. She had followed without noise, without fear, only the need to see. The child did not speak. She only watched. The woman kneeling, hands still on the stone, water rising around her fingers. The ground trembled again, deeper this time, rolling outward like a wave. From the basin far below came the first faint calls. Horses stamping, a woman's low voice waking others. Fires flickered back to life, small and distant. The woman lifted her hand. Water dripped from her palm, dark in the moon's light. She looked at the girl. The child looked back. No question, no accusation. Only witness. There was no path back down the cleft that would hide what had happened. The water ran. The ground knew. The camp was stirring. She rose slowly, knees stiff, and started down the path. The girl followed a step behind, silent, the blanket trailing like a shadow too long for the night. Dawn came slow and gray, the light bleeding over the ridge like spilled water on stone. The sacred mountain stood unchanged, dark bulk against a paling sky. But the basin below had altered. The new spring, born in the night from the forbidden cleft, now ran steady down the draw, pooling in shallow basins where the ground had cracked open. The water was not clear. It carried a faint, milky haze like smoke trapped under glass. And the smell of it was wrong. Mineral sharp, almost metallic, with an undertone of wet earth that should not have been disturbed. The people gathered at the pool's new edge without hurry. No one rushed to drink. They stood in loose order, blankets draped against the morning chill. Children held close. The horses nosed the water once, snorted, and backed away. The old man had come down from his place on the higher rock. He stood at the head of the gathering, blanket pulled tight, face shadowed. No words yet, only the soft lap of water against cracked mud and the low, periodic tremor underfoot, like the mountain itself breathing, slow and deliberate. She remained apart, 30 paces back, where the grass still clung thin and yellow. She did not approach the circle. She stood with arms at her sides, the braided cord still knotted at her wrist, though the leather now felt foreign against her skin. Her blanket hung loose from one shoulder. She watched the others without moving closer. The water flowed. The children would not thirst today. That much was done. The old man lifted one hand, palm open to the pool, then let it fall. A gesture without flourish. He spoke low, voice carrying just to the edge of the gathering. The ground has given, but it has taken something too. What was touched cannot be untouched. What was spoken cannot be unsaid. No one answered. Heads turned once toward the woman standing apart, then away again. The young mother drew her daughter tighter against her hip. The girl looked back over her shoulder, eyes steady, no longer curious, only watchful. The space between them had grown wider in the night, though no one had spoken it aloud. The old man stepped to the water's edge. He reached into the folds of his blanket and drew out a small object, a single hawk feather, bound with sinew and a bead of turquoise. He held it a moment, then placed it on the ground between the pool and the circle. Not a ceremony, not an offering, only a mark. The feather lay there, unmoving. No wind stirred it. She felt the weight settle deeper in her chest, not pain, not regret, only the certainty of something severed. She lifted her hand, fingers brushing the braided cord. The knot had tightened in the cold. She worked it loose, slow, deliberate. The leather slipped free. She held it a long moment, then let it fall to the dirt at her feet. It lay there, small and dark against the pale earth. The old man's eyes met hers, across the distance. No anger, no pity, only recognition. He made a small gesture with his chin, toward the circle, toward the feather. An invitation, or perhaps a final question. She could walk forward now, step into the ring, kneel beside the feather, let the others see the empty place on her wrist. Let the silence speak what words could not. The camp would keep her, perhaps, but the law would remain broken. The children would drink tainted water. The mountain would remember. Or she could turn away. Accept the distance. Let the camp move on without the weight of her presence. The water would run cleaner for them. The tremors might quiet. The girl would learn to forget. She chose neither. Not yet. She stayed where she was. The old man waited another breath, then nodded once, almost imperceptibly. He turned back to the circle. With a slow sweep of his arm, he marked a small ring in the dirt. No fire laid, no songs raised. Only the people standing close, heads bowed, the feather at the center. Silence thick as dust. The girl slipped from her mother's hold. She walked to the outer edge of the ring, but did not enter. She stood there, small blanket clutched in both hands, eyes fixed on the woman who remained apart. The ground trembled again, faint, almost gentle, like a sigh from deep stone. The woman did not move. She only watched the circle form without her, the feather lying still, the water flowing on, while the first light touched the sacred mountain and found no answer there. The sun stood straight overhead, a white-hot eye that burned away shadow. The circle had formed at the base of the sacred mountain. No fire laid, no poles raised, only people standing shoulder to shoulder on the bare earth. The ring was small, no wider than a man could stretch his arms. The milky water from the new spring ran past one edge, shallow and steady, pooling in shallow depressions before sinking back into cracked ground. No one drank from it yet. They waited. She walked forward alone. Boots scuffing dry dust, blanket left behind at the outer rim. Her hands hung empty at her sides. No knife, no cord, no feather. The leather mark on her wrist had faded to a pale band of skin where it once sat. She stepped into the circle without pause, without flourish, and stopped at the center. The people did not close ranks. They only stood, faces turned inward, breathing slow and even. The old man faced her across the narrow space, eyes steady under the shadow of his blanket hood. No words passed. No one lifted a hand in greeting or farewell. The wind rose once, sudden and dry, whipping dust into thin spirals that danced across the ring and died against the mountain's flank. The ground trembled, harder now, a deep roll that made the children shift their weight and the horses stamp far off. Somewhere high on the slope, a stone cracked, the sound sharp and final, like bone giving way. She looked once at the girl. The child stood outside the ring, small blanket clutched in both fists, eyes wide but dry. No tears, only the quiet watching of someone who has seen the world change shape and knows there is no putting it back. The woman held the gaze a heartbeat longer, then turned her head toward the mountain. Its dark face rose unbroken, pines clinging to the high shoulders like old scars. The old man stepped forward one pace. He reached into the folds of his blanket and drew out a small, smooth stone, black basalt, etched faintly with lines that might have been a hand or a feather, or nothing at all. He bent slowly, joints creaking, and placed it on the ground at her feet. Not an offering, not a judgment, only a mark. The stone lay there, catching the high sun, throwing no shadow. The water in the pool cleared for a moment, sudden, startling, then clouded again, as though the earth had tasted it and found it wanting. Another crack sounded from the mountain, higher this time, a thin snap of rock splitting under invisible pressure. She could kneel now, touch the stone, let her fingers close around it one last time, accept the place they offered, outside but not gone. The camp would keep her. The children would learn to step around her silence. The water would run, tainted but running. The mountain would remember, and the tremors would fade to whispers. Or she could turn, walk out of the ring, leave the stone where it lay. Let the camp drink without her weight beside the fire. Let the girl grow without the shadow of her presence. Let the mountain keep its anger for someone else. She chose the second. She turned, slow, blanketless, back to the circle. No glance over the shoulder, no word. She walked past the outer line of people, past the girl who stood rigid, past the pool that flowed on without pause. Her boots left shallow prints in the dust, prints that the wind began to erase before she had gone 20 paces. The girl took one step forward, then another. Small legs moving fast, blanket dragging. She ran a few strides, feet kicking dust, then stopped. She stood there, breathing hard, watching the woman's shape grow smaller against the long slope toward the horizon. The circle remained silent. The old man did not speak. No one moved to follow. The ground gave one last tremor, longer, deeper, like the mountain drawing a final breath. The woman kept walking. The sun burned high. The dust rose behind her in a thin veil, and the sacred mountain watched without answer. The afternoon wore thin, the sun sliding low and red behind the ridge, stretching shadows long across the dry basin. She walked alone, boots sinking into loose dust that gave no purchase, each step measured, deliberate. The land here was open, broken only by scattered juniper and clumps of rabbit brush gone brittle with drought. No trail marked her path. She followed the faint draw that led away from the mountain, away from the camp, the small spring she had forced open now miles behind and no longer hers to claim. The wind came steady from the west, carrying the faint dry scent of sage and distant smoke. Perhaps a far-off burn, perhaps nothing at all. It tugged at the loose ends of her hair, dried the sweat on her neck to salt. Her hands hung empty at her sides. The braided cord she had dropped at the circle's edge had not been retrieved. The place on her wrist where it had sat felt naked, lighter than it should. She did not look back, not once. Behind her, small footsteps followed, not close, not calling. The girl kept distance, 20 paces, 30, blanket trailing in the dust like a broken wing. The child walked without hurry, without sound beyond the soft scrape of hide soles on stone. She did not run to close the gap. She only kept the woman in sight, as though tethered by something neither could name. The woman felt the presence like a weight on her back. Not threat, not comfort, only the quiet knowledge that someone still saw her, even as the land began to forget. She came to a small seep at the bottom of the draw. A shallow depression no wider than her palm, water dark and still beneath a thin crust of alkali. She stopped, crouched. The surface reflected nothing, no sky, no face. She reached out, fingers hovering above the water. The air smelled of wet stone and faint rot. Her throat was dry, lips cracked from the long walk in the dust. She could dip her hand, drink. The water was there. The law no longer held her to it. She did not drink. Her fingers curled into a fist. She rose again, slow, joints stiff from the cold that had settled in the low places. The seep lay untouched behind her. The girl stopped too, a few steps away. Blanket clutched tight. The child's eyes were dark, steady, taking in the woman who stood motionless above the water she would not touch. No question passed the girl's lips. No hand reached out. Only the quiet watching, the small shape rooted in the dust while the woman remained apart. The woman turned her head once, not toward the child, but toward the horizon where the sun bled red into the earth. The wind carried the last faint call of a raven, distant, fading. The grass under her boots did not bend. It broke, dry and final, leaving no green trace of her passage. The land had already begun to erase her. She could stop now, turn, walk back the way she had come, kneel beside the girl, let the child's small hand find hers, let the camp see them return together. The water would still run, the children would still drink, but the tremors would not cease. The mountain would not forget. The girl would carry the shadow longer than she should. Or she could keep walking. Let the distance grow. Let the girl learn absence before she learned loss. Let the camp heal without the weight of what she had broken. She chose the second. She stepped forward again. One foot, then the other. The dust rose in small puffs behind her, settling slow. The girl remained where she was, blanket dragging, eyes fixed on the receding shape until the woman's outline blurred against the red light and the long shadow swallowed her whole. The wind died. The raven did not call again. The seep lay still, reflecting only the empty sky. The girl stood alone in the draw, small and unmoving, while the last of the sun slipped below the ridge and the dark came down without mercy. The night settled thick and final. No moon to cut the dark. She had walked until the basin fell away behind her, until the sacred mountain was only a deeper shadow against the stars. Now she sat on a flat stone far from any trail, knees drawn up, back to a lone pinyon whose needles smelled faintly of resin and old smoke. The fire she had built was small. 3 dry twigs, no more, fed just enough to keep the cold from biting too deep. It gave no smoke, only a low red glow that touched her hands and nothing else. The wind had died completely. No rustle in the brush, no distant call of night birds. The earth lay still beneath her. No tremor, no breath. It had stopped speaking. Not in forgiveness, not in anger. Simply silent, as though she were no longer part of the conversation. She reached into the small pouch at her belt, the last thing she had kept, and drew out a single seed bead, black and smooth, no bigger than the tip of her thumb. It had come from her mother's necklace once, passed down with no words, only the act of giving. She held it between finger and thumb, turning it slowly in the firelight. The bead caught the red glow for a moment, then dimmed again. She looked at it a long time. No song rose in her throat. No prayer formed on her lips. She had broken the law to save what remained. Water for the children, ground for the horses, life for another season. The camp would drink now. The tremors would quiet. The girl would grow without her shadow falling across the fire. That was enough. That was all there had been to do. She placed the bead on the stone beside her knee. Not an offering, not a burial, only release. The small black shape lay there, separate from her hand, separate from the fire. She did not cover it with dirt. She did not speak to it. She only let it rest. The fire burned lower. Coals pulsed once, twice, then steadied to a dull red eye. She watched it without blinking. The cold crept in at her back, slow and patient. Her breath came even, visible for a moment in the faint light, then gone. Far off. Miles now, perhaps more. The girl had stopped following. She stood alone on the last rise before the basin dropped away, small blanket wrapped tight, face turned toward the dark where the woman had disappeared. The child did not cry out. She did not move closer. She only stood, eyes fixed on the empty night, carrying what she had seen without the need to name it. A single star fell across the black bulk of the sacred mountain, swift, silent, gone before it could leave a trace. The woman lifted her hand, palm open. She closed it over the last coal. The heat bit sharp, then faded. No sound, no hiss. The red glow died between her fingers. Darkness closed in, complete and without edge. She sat motionless in the black, no word passed her lips. No gesture broke the quiet. The bead remained on the stone. The girl remained on the rise. The mountain remained silent. The night held them all, separate, and said nothing more. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment, and thank you for riding with us today. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. Our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully, only to support production, while keeping human supervision over editing, emotional tone, and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories.